From News 9, this is breaking news.
Special report here on News 9. Right now, Oklahoma County District Attorney Vicki Behenna is getting ready for a news conference about charges filed against officers in 3 use of force cases.
That's right. What we know so far is DA Behenna has dropped charges against 5 police officers in the death of Metro teen in 2020. That's what an attorney confirmed to News 9. We want to get you right out as it has just started.
These families are forever changed. Having said that, I want to first go through the process that this office went through, and then I will tell you the decisions that we've made in these 3 cases. There was a team of lawyers in this office, 7 lawyers that were gathered. We spent hundreds of hours reviewing the case file in each of these cases, and we reviewed it independently. So we looked at one case first. All 7 of us sat down and reviewed the facts, reviewed the dash cam, body cam, whatever evidence was available. And then we proceeded and did that with each of these 3 cases. The team of 7 lawyers that I had on this case are lawyers from all variety of backgrounds. There are some defense lawyers that reviewed the case. One was a judge advocate general in the military. We had lawyers that have experience in the AG's office and state government and prosecutors. All told, we have 160 years of experience that we're reviewing independently each of these 3 cases. In addition to the independent factual review that the office made, we enlisted and retained an expert to review these cases. Again, it was an independent review of each case on their facts. Once the expert reached a decision, and the expert, I guess I should explain that, the expert we hired was a use of force expert out of Oklahoma, who did his independent review. The expert reviewed all the material that had been gathered during the investigation. So body cam, dash cam, interview reports, and reports from the police department that were gathered as a result of the investigation. Once Mr. Chapman finished his review of the case, then he issued reports to us about what his belief was and whether or not it was a justifiable use of force or an excessive use of force. And again, the expert has no ties to Oklahoma. That was an intentional decision made by this office to make certain it was an independent review. In addition to reviewing the facts of the case, in addition to reviewing, having an expert review the evidence in the case, we reviewed Oklahoma law. There is a specific statute, specifically 21 OS section 732. It's an Oklahoma statute that is entitled Justifiable Deadly Force by Officers. That statute sets forth the groundwork and the law that we have to file in evaluating whether an officer has used excessive force or the force that he used was justifiable. That law basically says that if a suspect is trying to escape or evade arrest, and the suspect is believed to have committed a crime involving serious bodily harm or the threat of serious bodily harm, force, even deadly force, can be justifiable. The statute also says that if an officer reasonably believes the force is necessary to protect him or herself from serious bodily injury or to protect somebody else from serious bodily injury, then deadly force can be justified. In addition to that, some of you may or may not know, but the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals recently issued a decision in the state of Oklahoma versus John Mitchell. It's a case out of Kay County. It was issued, the opinion was issued in June of this year. That case gave us guidance about how the Court of Criminal Appeals is going to view and interpret 21 section 732, which is the justifiable use of force statute. Based upon that law, guidance from the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals, our experts' independent review of the case, and our evaluation of the facts, we've reached decision in each of the 3 cases. And let me just put a fine point on the review process again. I've told you who was involved in that. There were 7 of us with 160 years of experience as trial lawyers. But we spent hundreds of hours in reviewing the facts in each of these 3 cases. We had 2 and 3 meetings where we would sit down in this conference room and go over body cam footage or dash cam footage and ask questions. So I want to put a fine point on this, that this is not just a quick spur of the moment decision. This was a very difficult, very fact intensive decision and review. Based upon all of that information, as of today, in the case against Officer Chance Avery, the state of Oklahoma is going to dismiss the charges in that case. With regard to the 5 officers that were charged in the death of Stavian Rodriguez, that's Jared Barton, Corey Adams, Bethany Spears, Jonathan Scuda, and Bradley Pemberton, the decision by this office is that we were going to dismiss the charges in that case as well. The final case is a case involving Officer Sergeant Clifford Holman. Based again upon our review of the facts, based upon our experts' opinion and the law, we are going to dismiss the charges against Officer Holman. That is the decision that's been made. Those cases will be dismissed without prejudice. And I think it's important for each of you to know, moving forward from this point forward, anytime that there is an officer-involved shooting where a death results, those cases are going to be presented and investigated by the grand jury. I think that's what most metropolitan areas do, and I feel confident in the grand jury process that we can do a thorough review of the case and make decisions, again, that are evidence-based and consistent with the law in Oklahoma. Oh, without prejudice. Michael Fry is correcting me. I think I said without prejudice. Those cases are going to be dismissed with prejudice. My mistake, sorry. And with that, are we...
How did you prepare in advance? Did you prepare at all by telling anyone in the community or these families?
Thank you for asking that question, because that was on my list and I forgot to say that. So last night I spoke with the wife of Christopher Poore and advised her. This morning, beginning at 9 o'clock, I met with Stavian Rodriguez's mother, and I met with the family of Benny Edwards and advised them. In addition to that, I met with community leaders from the Northeast side and advised them of the decision. And again, the reasons, how we came up with this decision, that was fact-based and based upon this statute and guidance from the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals.
Can you generally characterize those discussions with the family, what those were like?
Awful.
Can you, you said reviewing everything, you determined that these cases fell within the justifiable use of deadly force as outlined in 21 section 732. Let's take the Edwards case in particular. Sergeant Holman, Edwards had a knife. He charged somewhat toward officers. He turned and ran, and he was running away from Sergeant Holman when Sergeant Holman fired what proved to be fatal rounds into his back. Mr. Prater, your predecessor who filed the charge, said that at the moment at which those shots were fired, Mr. Edwards did not pose a threat to the officers because he was running away in a parking lot. You obviously determined differently in your opinion. Please explain why.
Well, part of it is in consultation with an expert. I don't think an expert on the use of force had ever been retained in those cases to evaluate the facts and look at it frame by frame, which is what our expert did. In addition to that, as I stated under 21 OS 732, it states specifically that officers who are effecting an arrest on someone who is trying to escape an arrest and who has or has attempted bodily injury, a police officer can use deadly force, and that force would be justified based upon those factors. So I don't know what review of 732 was done, but in our review of it, and believe me, we've had much discussion in this office about that. And I think it's fair to point too that Mr. Edwards came at Sergeant Duroy once with a knife, and he was contained and the issue was de-escalated. Sergeant Smith got there, and then when Officer Holman arrived, they did use non-lethal force in an attempt to try to de-escalate the situation. When Mr. Edwards was hit in the face with pepper spray, that's when he charged, and in all fairness, he got within about 4 or 5 feet. We've done measurements of the parking lot and the distances. I mean, that's one of the things our expert reviewed. He got within 4 or 5 feet of Sergeant Duroy before he made the sharp left turn. But again, reviewing Oklahoma law, when somebody, even a fleeing felon who is has threatened bodily injury, officers can use excessive force.
I have
Just
two
to be
questions.
clear, and I'm so sorry, just real quick. So you don't view the facts of the case to be different than Mr. Prater did. You view the statute that exists, meaning that those officers should not and could not be prosecuted as a result.
Right, and our expert. I mean, we relied heavily on our experts' opinion.
How much did you pay the expert? What was the
You know,
terms
I
of the
don't know that
contract?
that's really relevant here, but we can talk about it offline.
Yes,
if
two
you want to.
questions. One, you said that the use of force expert was from Oklahoma, but he's from earlier, but he's not. I just wanted to clarify
No,
that.
and if I said that, that's a misstatement on my part. He's from
Okay.
California.
Okay, just wanted to clarify that.
Outside of Oklahoma.
And then as far as the Stavian Rodriguez case goes, I know that was, we have the video, we've seen that so many times. Police talked about a furtive movement. Was that something that the use of force expert also saw? And that was his, I guess that's what he used as far as that it was improper use of force in that case?
Well, the expert determined that it was a justifiable use of force.
Because he had committed the crime or that he had
No,
moved his
I
hand?
I think it was one, I mean, I tell young people all the time, when you are meeting with an officer, rightfully or wrongfully, maybe a stop that you don't think is fair, you have to follow the directions of the officers. And in this case, the officers were yelling at Stavian to get on the ground, and he wasn't getting down. And so then he reached for the weapon with his right hand and dropped that and then did the action here. And I think our expert believed that those not following orders and not getting on the ground and making this movement, the officers were in fear that he might have a second gun and then use deadly force.
Ms. Behenna, let me ask a couple of clarifying things. You said grand jury, you're talking about multi-county grand jury,
Yes,
not impaneling a separate Oklahoma County grand
I think that's right.
And
jury.
the,
You talked about your panel, was it lawyers from this office?
Yes, sir.
And that was you and 6 others?
Yes, sir.
and the use of force expert, they have a lengthy background in law enforcement. Do you
Yes.
think that may have led to a bias?
Actually, I looked diligently to find a use of force expert that was not what I consider tied too closely to law enforcement. There aren't a lot of use of force experts in the United States, and one of the reasons we landed on Mr. Chapman was because he did not.
What were the terms of the engagement with Mr. Chapman?
We can talk about that offline. I'm not
Okay.
sure that that's relevant here. I mean, I want to be respectful of the families as well.
Circling back to the charges, if the statute changes, can charges be refiled?
These will be dismissed without prejudice, or with prejudice. Jesus, I said it
Which
twice.
means-
Sorry.
Right, so I'm just clarifying for our audiences.
Yes.
So why is it that all 3 cases are being dismissed with prejudice?
Well, because the investigations are complete. So normally what happens is you can dismiss a case with prejudice if you think that there's some more work that can be done, or we might be able to get a witness to flip later on. The investigation is complete here. And so, again, I mean, my heart goes out to the families, it does, and I think it's important for there to be finality on this piece and not drag them out for another 2 or 3 years, or maybe 5 years. Who knows if there's going to be a change in the statute.
What was your message to the activists in the Northeast community?
To listen and to understand how frustrating these cases are for that community.
What went into making this announcement on a Friday afternoon?
You know what? I have a director of communications. You might need to ask her that.
How much did this decision come from the use of force expert, and how much did it come from your staff of lawyers?
I think it's equal. I mean, you know, I think I said very early on that it would be difficult, if not impossible, to prosecute this case without a use of force expert. The defense is going to have one, right? So I'm going to have a use of force expert. So that was the first part of it. And his guidance and consultation guided our discussions. But they were equally, I mean, if I didn't have a use of force expert, it would be hard to go forward. We can't testify. All we do is present the evidence.
And just so that I'm clear, with respect to the grand jury, so the Attorney General then will oversee the investigations into these, or no?
No.
So that'll be your office,
Yes.
but with a multi-county?
Just using the multi-county grand jury.
I see.
Ms. Behenna, would it be fair to characterize your decision as that you believe these shootings were justified, or is it just that you don't believe cases should go forward?
Well, under Oklahoma law, the shootings were justified, as this statute is defined and guides us. I mean, I have to follow the law.
Thank you.
So in your opinion, did these officers do their jobs well?
You know, I'd probably, let me just stick with the law in these cases in particular. I'm not a police policy person. I don't know how they're trained, and it probably is unfair for me to even comment on that. I mean, my analysis is truly a factual and legal analysis.
When did you meet with the chiefs of police for as far as Oklahoma City and the village, and what was that discussion like?
And Michael, do you want to take that?
In answer to your question, I met with the chiefs this morning and explained to them, just as Ms. Behenna has explained to you, our foundations, the reasons why we decided what we did, the evidence and the factual basis for it. They were receptive to what we had to say, and they have respectfully, I believe they're respecting our decisions. But it was not a long meeting.
And how does Marcy's Law go into play as far as the victims and this and their families?
That's why it was so important for me to talk to them first. To let them, I mean, you know, under Marcy's Law, they're entitled to know and be advised of the proceedings and what we're going to do. They don't get to decide whether or not we're going to pursue a case or not pursue a case. But it was important for me, because of Marcy's Law, to talk to them first.
You said you talked to civic leaders. What was their response?
Disappointed.
Are you afraid that we might have protests now? I mean, we've had protests before over decisions made, and that's why we had a big powwow of community leaders. But now it almost seems like we're back to square one on some of that.
I hope not. I mean, I'm hoping that the community, even the community on the northeast side, understands that this was a factual and legal analysis. And that's what guided our decision here.
So is there an immediate next step into, for instance, extending an olive branch to the community to keep the line of communication open as we move forward?
You know, I think the office tries to do that every single day. I mean, we've had 2 community events on the northeast side handing out trigger lock devices to people that have firearms. We did that on Juneteenth. We did it recently last weekend on the south side. So I am mindful of the fact that I need to listen and hear the community and their concerns and be involved in the community. So we will continue to do that. Keith, my chief investigator, my mission to Keith was to stay in communication with the Northeast side so that we hear if they have concerns. I want to know about it. And so we'll continue to do that.
Ms. Behenna, if I could ask you, earlier this week, I think it was 2 days ago, it looks like your office also dismissed the manslaughter charges facing an individual named Howard Barnett, who was a bail bondsman who forced his way into a hotel room on Thanksgiving Day in 2020. And those charges were dismissed, I believe, with, let me make sure I get it right, I'm not sure whether it says with or without prejudice, but I was wondering if you might be able to address what the determination was in the Barnett case.
Okay, I'm not prepared to talk about that today. Let me just stay focused on these officer-involved shootings.
Just to clarify the age, you had mentioned earlier that Christopher Poore was 40, but I've seen previous reports that he's 49.
That's right. I'm sorry.
No,
Thank you for
just wanna make
correcting
sure.
me. Yeah.
But are you familiar with the Barnett? I mean, did you make that decision, or was that handled, was the expert engaged on that? Like, how did, it's the same week, it's 48 hours ago.
I'll talk to you offline about that. This press conference is to talk about the officer-involved shootings.
Did you talk with the Northeast leaders about the Barnett case? Did that come up?
Is there anything else?
Thank you, Ms. Behenna.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I've locked myself out. Excuse me. I go this way. Yes.
All right, you just heard from the district attorney, Vicki Behenna, right there, saying that in all three of these cases, all the officers have been cleared. Those charges have been dismissed.
And also without prejudice, which we have learned, if you didn't already know that, it means the case is complete, no further investigation. If it was dismissed with prejudice, that would mean there would be further investigation. But again, the use of force independent expert that they hired from California that we learned, even though a team of 7 lawyers also spent hundreds of hours on this, said it was justifiable deadly force by the officers.
And he went through every case. This is a person's last name is Chapman. If you heard that name, that's what she was referring to, that person out of California, the use of force expert. And he goes through every single case along with those other attorneys as well, and came up with this decision that all three of them were justifiable in the use of force.
That's right. Okay, so just one of them. We're just going to touch on the one. Officer Clifford Holman from the Oklahoma City Police Department. This is an Edwards case. We're talking, this is what he said. Suspects exhibiting obvious symptoms of mental illness can be dangerous and a threat to officer safety. Mr. Edwards wasn't obeying commands to put the knife down and was acting erratically. Additionally, when Mr. Edwards charged at Sergeant DeRoy with the knife, he became an imminent threat to Sergeant DeRoy and committed a felony assault. And
that's the case right there. And you heard DA Behenna also saying that deadly force, according to Oklahoma law, can be justified if the officer feels the suspect is going to be committing bodily harm to them or someone else. Because this is the person who was running away when he was shot in the back. Also, with the Stavian Rodriguez case, the 15-year-old who was shot by the 5 police officers, this is what the expert, the use of force expert, has concluded in that. Stavian created a sufficiency of fear in the minds of the officers. He was repeatedly told to show his hands and to get on the ground. Instead of complying, Stavian lifted the front of his shirt and pulled a semi-automatic pistol from his waistband and dropped it on the ground, after which Stavian continued ignoring the officer's commands and lowered his left hand to the side of his waistband. And that's when those shots were fired. We've seen that video over and over again with that hand kind of going behind him. And officers obviously thought he was going for a gun.
Since November of 2020, yes, we've seen it. And then in the Village Department officer's case, Chance Avery, again, Chapman concluded a suspect armed with a potentially deadly weapon advancing directly toward a uniformed and armed police officer while disobeying orders to drop the weapon can be reasonably interpreted as a deadly threat. Officer Avery acted in strict accord with nationally accepted standards of proper procedures and tactics in defense of his life and in the lives of others in the face of an imminent and credible deadly threat.
And DA Behenna saying that she met with the family of Christopher Poore, met with the wife of Christopher Poore last night. He was the one you just saw. He's the one right here with the baseball bat. And she also spoke with the mom of Stavian Rodriguez. She had those conversations last night and said in both instances having these talks was awful. That was her description of those conversations.
And we do have reporters obviously at that press conference and reporters talking with the families of those involved. We have statements from them. And as Vicki Behenna mentioned, she was able to talk to them before this and you know, make sure that was dealt with before it came out on the news like this.
Yeah, she met with members of the black community last night as well, and talking with them and telling them her decision before announcing it here during this news conference. We are going to have team coverage on this throughout our newscast this evening. We do have a couple of comments, though, that have come into us that we want to pass them along here before we to get to our shows this evening. These are in reference to the Stavian Rodriguez case. We have
a statement from Stavian's mom. If we could get to that one, if you guys, it's coming. Okay, so Stavian's mom's statement about these charges being dropped. Here we go. This is actually from Rand Andy, the attorney for Cameo Holland. She met with my client only. I don't know, for some reason she excluded me from the meeting. I'm not sure why. We are extremely disappointed in her decision to dismiss the case against the 5 officers, and we're going to seek our redress in the civil proceeding that has been on hold for 2.5 years that will hopefully get started very soon.
So that civil case continues, of course, and we'll be updating you on that. Also, we do have a statement from Stavian's mom who says, when the district attorney of Oklahoma County apologizes to your face for the justice system failing you, it's clear we need changes in the law. That's what happened today. Before I leave Oklahoma, laws that allow officers to kill children will be changed, and every police officer that is ever hired or trained by Oklahoma City Police Department will know my son's name, Stavian Rodriguez.
Again, charges have been dismissed in all 3 of these cases. 7 lawyers reviewed and evaluated the reports from all of these and the body cam from all 3 cases. They spent hundreds of hours on that. Behenna wanted to say that repeatedly to know that she's not taking this lightly. And of course, hiring an out-of-state expert to do a review, an independent use of force review.
Stay with News 9, also News 9 for the very latest. We do have Jennifer Pierce, who was at that news conference. We're going to go to her before we get off the air right here. We have her thoughts here in a second from inside the DA's office there.
She's not quite ready, but again, we do want to hear from her. And again, the question was this justifiable or excessive force? Again, justifiable deadly force by these officers. Jennifer Pierce live for us right now, just coming out of this press conference. Jen.
Yes, Bobby, the press conference ended just a few moments ago, and as you all heard, Oklahoma County District Attorney Vicki Behenna has plans to dismiss all of the charges against the Oklahoma City officers who were involved in deadly use of force shootings. Also, the village officer, Chance Avery, who was also involved. Now, these all happened in 2020, one in July in the village, one in November in Oklahoma City, and then one in December. Now, she did talk about how she said there were at least 7 attorneys on this review to review all of these cases. She said they did a very thorough review. They also brought in a use of force expert from out of California to look at all of the dash cam, the body cam, and to formulate an opinion. And really, she summed it up really well that, you know, the state statute, they followed, she says that they followed that in this decision-making process, and that is that justifiable deadly force by officers, or deadly force is justifiable in certain circumstances if a suspect is trying to evade arrest, if they're if they're committing a felony at that time, if they fear that there will be harm to others, the public, or to the officers, that justifiable deadly force is allowed in those cases. And she spoke specifically about Sergeant Holman in that case with Benny Edwards, when Benny Edwards had a knife, and also Stavian Rodriguez, as he was allegedly had robbed a convenience store and had a gun. Now, we do know that a lot of this stems, these decisions have been on hold for about 3 years now. They were waiting for a decision out of Kay County with the Oklahoma State Court of Criminal Appeals to rule on a case, to rule an opinion on a case, a deadly use of force case there. And what has come out of that now is that the state criminal court, the Court of Criminal Appeals, says that there has to be a use of force expert that reviews these cases going forward. And Behenna also said that they will, going forward, if there is an officer-involved shooting in Oklahoma County, she will turn it over to the multi-county grand jury that she will oversee. Again, there's a lot of information coming out of this press conference, but just wrapping up the main key points in this. Again, she plans to dismiss charges against 6 Oklahoma City police officers and 1 village police officer. Live at the Oklahoma County Courthouse, Jennifer Pierce, Oklahoma's own News 9.
Jen, great job in your coverage there. We will continue covering this throughout our 4. One more time, the independent expert in all 3 of these different cases said, were they protecting themselves or others? Either way, it was justifiable, and that's when he saw the excessive force was necessary.
More team coverage coming up in about 30 minutes. We'll see you then.